The wind howled through the tall pines as Daniel Mitchell stood in the doorway of his mountain cabin, watching the newest mail-order bride climb into the wagon that would take her back down to civilization. He did not call after her. He did not ask her to stay. He simply stood there with a tired heaviness in his eyes as the seventh woman left him without a goodbye. 7 brides, 7 disappointments. 7 long weeks of trying to make someone stay in a world most people feared. The wagon rolled away, its wheels groaning against frozen ground. When it disappeared behind the bend, Daniel closed the heavy door and leaned his back against it. His rough palms slid over his face as he pushed his dark hair away. At 32, he had carved a life from these Colorado mountains with his own hands. He trapped, hunted, built, repaired, and survived. But the one thing he could not seem to build was a family. Every failed bride proved the same thing. No woman wanted this life. No woman wanted him. He had written to the marriage broker in Denver again and again. The man kept promising a better match each time. The next woman, he said, would understand hardship. The next woman would stay. Her name was Ruth Gutierrez, a seamstress from the East, 28 years old, practical, strong, and used to hard work. The broker said she was of a fuller figure, mentioning it as if that made her more likely to survive mountain life. Daniel did not care about her size. He only needed someone who would not run. As winter deepened, snow piled high against the walls of his cabin. Days grew shorter and colder. Nights felt longer than entire months. Daniel prepared for the new bride the same way he always did. He cleaned, stocked food, and told himself not to expect much. Hope was a dangerous luxury. 3 weeks passed after the letter arrived. The mountain paths grew icy. The weather turned sharp and mean. If Ruth did not reach him soon, she might not make it at all. When the supply wagon finally struggled up the mountain one bitter morning, Daniel felt something shift inside him. Not hope. Just awareness that this might be the last chance he would take. He had been splitting wood when he heard the wagon wheels creaking through the snow. He walked to the edge of his property as the wagon dragged itself forward like an exhausted animal. A large figure sat beside the driver, wrapped in thick wool from head to toe. This had to be her. Old Pete, the driver, slowed the horses with a grunt of relief. "Got your bride here," he called. "And Mitchell, this was the roughest run I have made. Weather is turning bad. Real bad." The woman climbed down carefully. She moved steady and sure, not clumsy or frightened. When she turned toward Daniel, he saw dark, thoughtful eyes studying him, not with fear, but with calm understanding. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, her voice level and warm. "I am Ruth Gutierrez. I have come as we arranged." Daniel nodded, suddenly unsure of himself. "Welcome to the mountain, ma'am. I hope the journey was not too hard." "I have endured worse," she said. She looked around at the snow-covered pines, the quiet valley, and the cabin he built log by log. "It is harsh, but it is also beautiful." When Pete left, Ruth did not watch the wagon go. She did not chase after it. She simply stood firm in the cold wind, waiting for Daniel to speak. "Come inside," he said. "You should not stay out in this weather." The cabin was warm and solid. Ruth ran her hand along the smooth wooden table. "You built all this?" Daniel nodded. "Took me 3 summers. It is good work," she said. "You know how to make things that last." Something inside Daniel loosened at her words. Ruth unpacked her things slowly that evening, examining the space that would become her home. The silence of the mountains settled around her, soft and deep. After years of crowded factories and loud machines, the quiet felt like a blessing. Daniel cooked venison stew and fresh bread. It was simple but filling. Ruth ate gratefully. "The bread is good," she said. "You bake it." "Had to learn," Daniel said, embarrassed. "No one else here to do it. I can bake, I can sew, I can preserve food. I will not be a burden." Daniel watched her with a look he had not given anyone in a long time. "It is not about earning your keep, it is about surviving up here." Their first week was calm and steady. Ruth rose early, kept the fire going, mended Daniel's clothes, and organized the pantry with skilled hands. She did not complain about the cold or isolation. She asked questions, listened carefully, and learned the rhythms of mountain life faster than any woman who had come before. When Daniel told her that the snow would trap them in for weeks come January, Ruth did not look frightened. "Then we must be prepared," she said simply. The word we stayed with Daniel long after. Ruth settled into the life with ease that surprised him. She did not fear the storms. She studied the weather, learned the animal tracks, and listened to the wild sounds of the night, like someone learning a new language. Daniel found himself explaining things he had never shared with anyone. By the third week, they were working side by side, splitting wood in the cold air. She swung the smaller axe with steady strength. "You are taking to this better than I expected," Daniel said. "I have always adapted," Ruth answered. "Survival depends on being useful." Daniel realized he respected her, and for the first time in years, he felt the quiet shift inside the cabin. Not the lonely quiet, a different kind. A gentle one, the kind that grows when two people fit the same world. Winter was coming, and the mountain would test her soon. But Daniel Mitchell felt something he had not felt in a long time. A small but steady spark of hope. A heavy gray sky pressed down on the mountains when Daniel stepped outside the next morning. Snow was coming. He could smell it in the air and feel it in the cold bite of the wind. Ruth stood at the doorway wrapped in a thick shawl, watching him with steady eyes as he brought in the last load of firewood. The first real test would come soon. The mountain never let anyone stay without proving themselves. By noon, the storm had arrived. The wind roared through the pines like a living thing, shaking branches and sending snow flying sideways. Daniel checked the cabin walls again and again, making sure nothing would loosen under the storm's force. Ruth kept the fire strong and steady, her movements calm even as the windows rattled. The storm grew worse as night fell. Snow piled against the cabin windows until the world outside disappeared in a swirling white wall. Daniel moved restlessly, pacing from one corner of the room to the other. Ruth watched him sew a leather strap with tense hands. "You are worried," she said simply. He stopped pacing, surprised she saw through him so easily. Most people never noticed when his mind tightened like this. "The north wall," he admitted. "It settled last spring. If the wind keeps up, the gap might widen." "Show me." Daniel grabbed a lantern and brought her to the corner. A thin draft slipped through a narrow line where two logs had separated. Snowflakes blew inside with every strong gust. Ruth examined it with sharp attention. "Do you have old cloth?" He brought her strips of worn linen from a storage trunk, and together they pushed the cloth into the gap, packing it tightly. Her hands moved quickly and skillfully. Daniel realized her smaller fingers could reach places his could not. When they finished, Ruth stepped back. "That will hold for now." Daniel nodded, strangely grateful. He had been alone so long that sharing a problem felt unfamiliar, almost dangerous. Yet with Ruth beside him, it felt easier. "Thank you," he said. Ruth studied him quietly. "Is this why you wanted a wife?" "To have help." "Part of it," he admitted, "but not the biggest part." "Then what is the biggest part?" Daniel hesitated. The storm screamed outside, shaking the walls. He stared into the dark window where snow flashed past like white fire. "The quiet," he said finally. "It gets so quiet up here that you forget what your own voice sounds like. You start wondering if you are still a man or just another part of the mountain." Ruth nodded as if she understood every word. "In the city," she said, "you are surrounded by people and still invisible. That noise is worse. This quiet has space in it. Space for thought. Space for two people to learn each other." Daniel looked at her. Ruth did not speak often, but when she did, her words felt solid as carved wood. The storm lasted 3 days. Ruth never complained. She cooked meals that stretched their supplies. She mended Daniel's heavy winter coat. She moved around the cabin with calm purpose that kept fear at bay. By the time the storm broke, Daniel realized something important. She had not cracked. She had not panicked. She had not once spoken of leaving. When the sun returned, the world outside was buried in white. Snow rose nearly to the windows. The trees sparkled like they held diamonds instead of ice. Ruth stood in the doorway wrapped in her shawl. Her breath rose in white clouds as she looked at the glowing valley. "My God," she whispered, "it is beautiful." Daniel looked at her instead of the mountains. Snow glittered in her dark hair. Her face, usually calm and guarded, was open with wonder. "Yes," he said softly, "it is." Days passed. They slipped into a rhythm Daniel had never known with anyone. Ruth woke early and tended the fire. Daniel checked traps. Ruth prepared breakfast and set clothes to dry. Daniel hauled water and repaired tools. Neither needed to speak often. They worked beside each other as if the mountain had shaped them for the same life. One cold evening, Ruth sat by the fire sewing while Daniel worked on a broken trap. Her voice was quiet when she spoke. "I was married once." Daniel froze. "He died," she continued. "Consumption. We were married 6 months. I learned then that love is not enough. You need trust, purpose, partnership." Daniel stared into the flames. "Is that why you answered my advertisement?" Ruth nodded. "You wrote honestly. No promises of easy days. No lies. Just truth. I respected that." Daniel swallowed. "And what have you learned here?" Ruth looked up at him. "That we work well together. That we do not irritate each other. That you keep your word. And that you are the kind of man I can build a life with." The words settled in Daniel's chest like something warm and steady. Winter deepened. Temperatures fell low enough that water froze solid within minutes. Daniel spent longer hours on the trap lines. Ruth tended the cabin with calm skill. Some nights he returned after dark to find Stu waiting on the fire and his gear drying beside it. One evening he said, "You do not need to wait up for me." "I know," she answered, "but I worry when you are gone too long." Daniel stopped in the middle of the room. No woman had ever said that to him without fear in her voice. The next morning he taught Ruth to read the weather, to recognize animal tracks, to handle the rifle. "We are partners," he said. "You need to know how to survive if something happens to me." Ruth practiced until she hit every target. She focused hard. Her hands did not tremble. Daniel watched her with growing respect. Then one morning she set down the rifle and faced him with quiet strength. "Daniel, are you satisfied with our arrangement?" He blinked. "What do you mean?" "We live as business partners, sharing work but not life. Is that what you want? Or were you hoping for more?" Daniel felt heat rise in his face. He looked at the snow-covered ground, at his boots, anywhere but her eyes. "I want more," he said finally. "But I have learned not to expect what I cannot earn." Ruth smiled, warm and gentle. "Then tell me this. What are you willing to do to earn a real marriage?" "Whatever it takes," Daniel said without hesitation. Ruth stepped closer. "Then we understand each other." Daniel felt the mountain wind pause, felt the world shift quietly around them. Ruth Gutierrez had not come for fantasy. She had come for truth. And truth was something Daniel had in abundance. Their real marriage was beginning. Spring crept slowly into the mountains, melting the deep winter snow and revealing the land beneath bit by bit. For the first time in months, Daniel and Ruth could walk outside without fighting through waist-high drifts. The air still held a sharp bite, but the sun felt warmer on their faces. By now, their partnership was steady, natural, and sure. They worked side by side each day, moving with a rhythm that came from months of surviving together. But with the snow melting and the future stretching open before them, something deeper began to grow between them. One morning, Ruth walked the edge of the cabin foundation with her hands on her hips, studying it the way she studied everything. "We should add another room," she said. Daniel looked up from the woodpile. Another room. Yes, a place for sewing and your woodworking. And maybe someday a nursery. Daniel froze. The word nursery hung in the mountain air like a warm flame. He had dreamed of a family, but stopped believing it would ever happen for him. "You want children?" he asked. Ruth nodded, her dark eyes steady. "I want a real family. A home built on honesty and work and respect. Do you want that too?" Daniel felt the truth rise from the deepest place inside him. More than anything, that settled it. They began the project that afternoon. Daniel cut timber, while Ruth helped measure and plan. She held boards steady, hauled smaller logs, mixed chinking, and offered clever ideas that made the work easier. Daniel found himself smiling more than he had in years. When the first supply wagon of the season arrived, old Pete climbed down and stared at the construction with wide eyes. "Well, I will be. Looks like you two are settling in for good," he said. "About time someone stayed on this mountain with you, Mitchell." Daniel rested a hand on Ruth's shoulder. "She's not going anywhere." Ruth gave a firm nod. "We are building something real here." Pete chuckled and unloaded parcels. Among them was a letter from the marriage broker asking if Daniel still needed more candidates. Ruth read it and shook her head. "Tell him we are done," she said. "Tell him the right woman already came." Daniel mailed back, "No more candidates needed. Found the woman who stayed." That night, as they sat on the porch watching the sky turn gold, Daniel felt a peace he had never known. Ruth leaned against him, warm and solid. "Do you ever regret coming here?" he asked. "Never," she said. "This is where I belong." Summer brought long days of steady work. Ruth's garden grew strong under her careful hands. Daniel's trap lines ran smooth. They shared stories, shared plans, shared quiet evenings by the fire. Nothing felt forced. Nothing was uncertain. Their lives fit together like two pieces carved from the same rough wood. Visitors were rare, but one traveling preacher stayed for supper on his way through the mountain pass. He watched the way Daniel and Ruth moved around each other, passing tools, finishing each other's thoughts, working like two souls who had been together their whole lives. "You two have something rare," the preacher said, "something built on more than romance." Ruth smiled. "We built this on purpose, on work, on choice." Daniel nodded. Love grew after the foundation was strong. The preacher left the next morning, but his words stayed with them. "Do you think we love each other?" Ruth asked that night. Daniel looked at her across the firelight. "I think we built something stronger than most people ever find. And yes, I think it is love." Autumn brought color sweeping across the mountains. Orange, gold, and deep red lined the hillsides as Daniel and Ruth prepared for their second winter together. Their movements were practiced now. Their plans were efficient. They knew exactly how to divide the work without speaking a word. One evening, as Ruth knitted by the fire, she said softly, "I have been thinking about the women who came before me. Why do you think they could not stay?" Daniel looked up from the harness he was repairing. "They wanted something that wasn't real. They wanted an easier life. A softer man. A prettier dream." Ruth nodded. "They came here, hoping to be saved, not hoping to work." "You came looking for truth," Daniel said, "and you stayed because you understood it." Ruth gave him a warm smile. Everything worked out exactly right. The first snow of the new winter fell softly outside the cabin that night. Daniel watched it gather on the window. The world felt peaceful, steady, strong. When spring returned, the biggest change of all arrived with it. Ruth was expecting their first child. Daniel stood in stunned joy when she told him. The cabin felt brighter, the mountains felt kinder, the world felt full in a way he had never known. "Are you scared?" he asked her as they stood on the porch one evening watching the sunset color the peaks. "A little," she admitted. "But not about us. We will raise our child with the values we live by each day. Hard work, honesty, respect. That is what matters." Daniel rested a hand on her shoulder. "We will raise them right." Through summer, as Ruth's belly grew, Daniel built the extra room they had planned. He carved a cradle by hand. He stocked supplies. He wrote down all the mountain knowledge he wanted to teach his children someday. Old Pete arrived with the supply wagon and laughed with joy when he saw Ruth. "Well now, looks like this mountain is finally getting a new generation." As the wagon rolled away, Ruth slipped her hand into Daniel's. "Do you think our child will love this place the way we do?" Daniel looked at the mountains that had shaped him, saved him, and now given him a family. "They will," he said, "because they will grow up learning its ways, and they will grow up knowing they were born from a true partnership." When the first snows of their third winter began to fall, Daniel and Ruth stood together at the cabin window, watching the world turn white again. This time there was no fear in the cold season ahead. Only peace, only excitement, only gratitude. The mountain man, who had been abandoned by 7 brides, had finally found the one woman who refused to leave, the one who stayed, the one who matched him, the one who built a life beside him with strength, honesty, and love. Together, they faced the winter as a family.